tip of the week, we're going to go through some of the best practices when it comes to rehabbing. And we've got a lot of prior tips. So if you guys are joining us on our YouTube channel that focuses on investing here in Texas, you can see some of our prior tips of the weeks and just kind of get an idea of what it's like to be a real estate investor and be part of Texas REIAs. So the subject tonight is we're going to talk about some of the best practices that you can have on your renovation project. So we're in a very interesting time period right now when it comes to renovations, because not only are we stopped by supply, have a lack of supply when it comes to inventory that's available for investors to buy, we're also in a situation where we're in a supply constraint when it comes to our ability to fix and flip the houses that we buy, because some of the supply chain shortage is also affecting us there. So keep that in mind as you are going through and doing your renovation. One of the biggest mistakes, one of the most typical mistakes that I see is that most real estate investors, especially as they are new, take a lot longer on their renovations than, for example, some of the experienced real estate investors that are out there. So I want to go ahead and share with you guys some of the best practices so that you can kind of think through this as you are working through either your first renovation, your 10th renovation, or your 100th renovation. And that is some ideas and understanding about what that scope of work should look like. So a typical contractor, especially in this market when they are so very busy, what do they typically want to give you in terms of a scope of work? What does their scope of work look like? Fixed house, $50,000, half due today, right? Is that pretty typical? Why? Because it takes about up to 30 minutes for every page in terms of detail that you're writing in terms of your scope of work. So for example, on a $50,000 house where you might be doing about 5 pages of detail, right? It might take a typical investor, even you guys, anywhere from 2 to 2.5 hours to be able to draw that up. Do they have that much time to be able to give to you right now? No, because they're being pulled in 55 different ways, doing 55 different projects, and they're already doing those by the skin of their teeth, meaning that there's not enough time in the day for all the projects that they have. But for you guys, when you are working with a contractor, you want to protect yourself, and the best way to protect yourself is to have that contract drawn up properly and detail every single thing that you possibly can. And when I say detail everything that you possibly can, I mean down to the hinges, right? Down to like that little of an expense, that little of an item. And the way to kind of know if you've done this right is this. For every $10,000 you forecast that you'll be spending, you should have at least a 1-page detail, and I mean like 10 or 12 point font in terms of your scope of work. So if, for example, you have a $50,000 project, you should have at least 5 items or 5 pages of line item detail for that. Right? And again, this means getting down to the hinges in terms of the level of detail there, right? You want to spec everything. The more you've spec'd, the less of an opportunity that you have to rely on your memory and or your contractor's memory in terms of making sure that the job gets done in the way that you want it to get done. So if you find that you're in a project, for example, that's, you know, a $50,000 project, and your contractor gives you a scope of work that's 2 pages long, what can you pretty much guarantee? You pretty much guarantee that the detail is not there for you to end up with the kind of product that you're going to want at the end of the day. You can almost guarantee that you're going to end up in a situation where you're probably going to be arguing with your contractor about something that you thought that you were here and they were there, and we just, you know, we really got each other, and you complete me, and it's like this beautiful symbiotic thing that's going on, and then you get a couple weeks into the project and you're like, oh no, we got some misunderstandings, right? Part of the misunderstanding is not because, you know, and some of the ways that I, you know, think about it is, you know, are they, you know, trying to do something to hurt me? And the answer is probably not, but have they slept? And sometimes when we sleep, are we losing some bits of our memory, right? In terms of what we agreed or what was said? And the answer is yes. So I'll just ask you guys, implore you guys, my coaching to you guys is don't rely on your memory to be able to come up with that right scope of work, instead detail it. And it, you know, literally the way that I do it, I've got kind of two different things that I do. I always walk through the house with something I call my Rehab helper, which is really just a very simple one-page document to make sure that I'm hitting all of the highlights of everything that I want to replace. It helps me do a very quick budget analysis on that property. The other thing that I'll do that really helps me a lot is I'll take my phone and I'll do a voice memo so that I can walk through every room and detail everything in every room that I want to get done. That way, when I'm typing up that scope of work or sending that voice memo to that contractor, what do you think I've got covered? I probably got everything covered in it, right? And I promise you, if you take the time to do this, and it does take time, but it is worth every single moment that you spend up front on this project, it will serve you on the back end of the project. It will really help you a lot. So I highly recommend that you use this rule of thumb in terms of your scope of work, that for every $10,000 you're spending, you should have at least a one-page detail scope of work. And also want to give you some ideas on what it looks like in terms of dollar per square foot, just so you can make sure, is this number sound right? Because sometimes you might find that, oh, it's much less, or in some cases much more than I would have expected in terms of dollars per square foot. So I would say on a house, for example, that's built from the 1930s to the 1970s, and it has an ARV of at least 300 and maybe even up to 400 or 500, expect to spend somewhere between $40 and $60 per square foot. Expect to spend between $40 and $60 per square foot. So for example, on a, let's say it's a $50 a square foot and it's a 1,000 square foot house, right? You're looking at spending $50,000 at minimum, right? And then if it's 1,500 square feet, then you might be looking at spending at least $75,000 to get that up to an ARV, that a property that would sell for about $300,000. So that's kind of a good rule of thumb to make sure, does the bid that I'm getting, does it sound right? Does it compute to what other things that we're seeing include? So on the $60 and up a square foot level, we're talking about extensive renovations. We're talking about new kitchens. We're talking about new bathrooms, flooring, roof, air conditioning, water heater, plumbing, electrical. Could be new windows. In some cases, it could be foundation, right? Foundations is one of those wild cards. So with all of the houses that I've walked through, sometimes it's still hard for me to this day to say, is this a $20,000 foundation renovation or a repair, or is this a $30,000 or $35,000 foundation renovation or repair? There's something interesting when it comes specifically to foundations. You can have 3 companies that come in there that all bid the same job, which to me is fix the foundation, right? And then they all give you just a very wide variety of bids, right? So I would take that foundation bid out of that, out of this $40 to $60 a square foot, because that can be that wild card that in some cases can put you in a situation where you may not know that exact number. Luckily, there are a lot of local foundation companies that can come by and bid that for you. I recommend always getting multiple bids. A lot of new investors always go with the lowest bid, and then they get punched in the face by the, not physically, but it's more like punched in the wallet or money ripped out of the wallet. I don't know how you want to consider that. By going with that lowest bid and maybe getting that lower quality of work. So do be careful about that as well. When it comes to best practices, also I want to just kind of give you some baseline numbers that will be helpful for you. Now, I gave a couple of different price ranges here. Now, some of you guys who are experienced real estate investors are looking at this and saying, $100,000 house, like, does that even exist anymore? And the truth is, in the core of the city, the answer is absolutely no, it doesn't. But as you get a little bit further out of the core, right, or if you get into some areas that are a lot rougher, occasionally you'll see these types of houses, right? But on a $100,000 house, are you going to put in my favorite colors, granite and stainless steel? No, you're not, right? Are you going to put in a little elbow grease and a little duct tape maybe? Yes, right? So that's why you're looking in that range at somewhere between $10 to $20 a square foot. Now, if you're doing some of that basic updating on a $200,000 house, so again, and there are very few of those left right now too, I am aware, but here's the price range that you need to be looking at on those $200,000 houses, right? So on a 1,000 square foot house, you might be spending somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 to be able to resell it at $200,000. Now, are you putting in a new kitchen and new bathrooms at that point? And the answer is probably not. But are you making it very livable, and are you painting and new flooring, possibly new roof, possibly new air conditioning system, fixing the foundation, any plumbing or electrical repairs? Then the answer is yes. But you're not typically putting in my favorite colors, again, granite and stainless steel. Now, on a property that has an ARV closer to $300,000, you're looking at spending somewhere between $40 and $60 a square foot. So if it's a 1,000 square foot house, you might be spending $60,000. And in some cases at 60, and on a smaller house, you might be putting in some of those nicer finish outs, right? In some cases, you might be putting in new countertops, but you might not be putting in new cabinets, right? In some cases, you might not be tearing out walls. If we're tearing out walls, are we adding more money to that project? And the answer is yes. On that extensive remodel on a $400,000 to $500,000 house, you're going up again. You're going up to that $50 to $70 a square foot, and typically that's where you're adding, bringing in the new kitchen, bringing in the new bathrooms, typically tearing out walls, that sort of project. On a new build house in that $300,000 to $500,000 range, you're typically spending about $125 to $175 a square foot. Now, $125 is a very typical number for the Houston and Dallas markets. You can get a little bit below that in the San Antonio markets, but when you get closer to Austin, the Austin contractors seem to speak a little bit different language, and really it just has more commas in it, right? So in Austin, for a new build, you're looking at least $175 a square foot in that market. And partially it's because of the contractors, but a big driver of that is also includes some of the permitting but the building requirements that change from city to city to city, right? So do know that you'll see that variation. That's why a lot of Austin investors will actually pull their contractors from San Antonio and actually get them, literally like, here, stay at the house, or here's an RV, you can stay, park here, or here's a hotel room, you can stay here for the week, to be able to take advantage of some of those lower prices that sometimes you see in San Antonio. So that's a little way to be able to trick the market a little bit and leverage some of those different prices in the different markets. Now, I also want to give you some of the best practices when it comes to budgeting time. So this is, again, one of the biggest mistakes that I see new investors make. They think that everything's going to happen overnight. They don't budget for rain or, tornadoes or hurricanes. Not that, most markets are getting those, but sometimes we see those. In fact, the Austin area actually got some tornadoes and hail. So when you are budgeting for your renovation project, probably the best way to do it is to expect to spend about every week you need to be expecting to spend at least $5,000 a week. Now, I don't want you to think of it like, oh, well, week 1 I spend $5,000, week 2 I spend $5,000, week 3 I spend $5,000. No, because at the beginning of a project, what are some of the big things that you're doing? You're typically doing foundation. Can you spend $20,000 on a foundation in about a week? And the answer is yes, easily, right? But the idea is not to budget the dollar amount that you spend every week, but the total time period that you'll be in this project. Does that make sense? Do you understand that what I'm saying, guys? So if, for example, it's a $50,000 project and you're spending $5,000 a week on average over the course of the project, you're going to be budgeting at least 10 weeks. Now, what's very interesting about this is for the first several weeks, again, it's front loaded. So you're going to be spending a lot more in the first several weeks and very little in the last few weeks. This is when you're going in and putting in the blue tape, and you're bringing back a plumber, you're bringing back an electrician, you're bringing back a tile guy, you're bringing back a painter, right? So you're spending less money per week at the very end, but these are still kind of those final wrap-up things that have to go on and still extend your project. So when your contractor says, oh, this is a $50,000 project, it's only going to take me about 5 weeks to do it, just smile and say, oh, wonderful, that's great. Yeah, 5 weeks you say, right? Like, yeah, and don't try to say, some investors will try to say, well, I'm gonna fine them, for every day he or she is over, that 5 weeks that they told me, I'm gonna tell them they're gonna owe me $300 a day or $200 a day or 100, it's like, yeah, you know what that contractor is gonna say when you try to put that clause in there? Go find someone else. I'm not the person for the job, right? Now, 14 years ago, just kind of going back in my investor time machine, if you put that clause into a contractor agreement, what would the contractor say? Going back to 2008. What would they say? Sure. Yes, I will happily do that, right? It was a different time in real estate, a different time in contracting. Are we always kind of ebbing and flowing with what the market is throwing at us at the time? The answer is yes, right? At some point, maybe in 10 or 15 years, we might be able to throw a clause like that in. But I don't think for probably the next 10 to 15 years, we will be able to throw a clause like that in. Why would it be 10 or 15 years before we could ask someone to be a person of their word that they just told us that this was what it was going to be? Why would it be that long?
The markets.
The markets? Why would it be that long?
The supply chain.
Supply chain? Why would it be that long? Someone says weather. Someone says what? New policies, best practices. What else? Staffing. Yeah, staffing. So what does that look like? So I don't know about many of you guys, but when I was a little girl, the socializing that I got was, you are going to college. There is no passing go without you doing that. When I was a little girl, people who worked with their hands were not as, looked as well upon, right? Can anybody else relate to that? Yeah. So what did they tell you? They said, go get an education. And they said, work with your brain. So what situation has that kind of put us in?
The information.
A shortage of labor. A shortage of the trades. How long is that going to continue to affect us?
Until contractors, unite and start forming, in-house training.
Until contractors unite and start forming in-house training.
Not necessarily until they, it's not all on contractors, but part of what I do, I'm just getting into real estate investment, but I work with HVAC contractors, and a lot of that is, there's a shortage of, labor.
A shortage of labor, yeah. And there's going to be a shortage of labor for a long time because we've been socialized for a long time, right, to get into work that involves our brains. And, I've been saying this for years, and, especially after seeing this, I think, seeing a bunch of young people coming out of college with, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt, and only able to get a job where they're making like $50,000 a year.
Yeah.
Whereas if they would have gone into the trades, which might have been more suited for them, who knows, right? They would have maybe had no debt. They would have been working in maybe a few years, right? Or apprenticing under someone else after a few years, right? And then they would have been making more than their friends who went to college, right? So I don't know if it's the getting these trades together as much as it is someone seeing that there is a disruption in the marketplace. And for sometimes people will see these disruptions as a crisis, and other people will see it as an opportunity. So what will some people say as an opportunity as? Oh yeah, I'm not going to get $200,000 of debt in college. I'm going to go and apprentice under a trade. And I'm going to make more money than all of my friends who are out there going to college. Now, how long is something like that going to take? 10 or 15 years. I think probably at least. Yeah, it's going to create a lot of opportunity. It's going to create a lot of disruption. But if you're heads up about where that disruption lies and where that disruption is going to stay for a long time, I think for all of us, there's probably a little bit of opportunity there, right, in terms of what we do, and especially as what we do as real estate investors. So getting back to this, want to also notate that this is the budgeting of time. This is after you get your permits. So in some cities, you'll be able to get permits very quickly. In other cities, it might take you months to be able to get permits, especially if you are tearing up existing property down. Especially if it's in a historic area where they don't want you to do that. And sometimes that can slow down your project. So also be aware of that. In that case, it's no fault of the contractor, right? It's just the fault of working with the city. And then of course, supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, this can be even longer now. And again, I forecast this is going to continue to be longer. So that's what I wanted to share with you in terms of best practices when it comes to renovating properties and just kind of understanding what is disrupting our renovations right here, right now. And want to make sure you guys are full of as much knowledge as possible, because that's what we love to do and share as part of Texas REIA. So you're not out there, as I like to say, a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't even there. And that's where I find a lot of investors are as they get started. So